The young and the restless spoilers. The tension that had been simmering beneath the golden glow of Los Angeles was about to erupt into something neither Kyle Abbott nor Claire Newman could have predicted. The distance between Genoa City and the West Coast wasn't just geographical, it was emotional, psychological, and deeply symbolic of the widening gap that now separated them. For Kyle, what began as a sincere effort to rebuild his life after heartbreak and corporate chaos in Wisconsin had turned into an emotional quagmire. He had come to Los Angeles with clarity in mind, to win back Claire, to show her that he was not the same man she had walked away from, that he was willing to understand her silences, her insecurities, and her slow steps toward trust. Yet the more time he spent near her, the clearer it became that there were corners of her soul he could not reach, and shadows in her eyes that whispered of someone else, someone new, who had already found a way in. That someone was Holden Novak. Holden was an enigma from the moment he arrived in Los Angeles. To the outside world, he was charismatic, steady, and endlessly patient, a man who seemed to have mastered the art of making people feel safe. But Kyle, with his own history of betrayal and manipulation, recognized the signs of a man who could play both sides of the same game. He saw it in the subtle way Holden's gaze lingered on Claire, not just with affection but with calculation. He saw it in how Holden's words always seemed perfectly timed, perfectly measured, as if each one had been crafted to draw Claire closer while keeping everyone else at arm's length. It wasn't paranoia, Kyle knew this type. He had been this type before. He knew what it meant to see someone vulnerable and convince himself that he was helping her while secretly building an emotional dependency that would keep her tied to him. Yet Claire Newman was not the fragile woman she once was. Her journey from being the lost and manipulated young woman under Jordan's control to the reborn, self-aware Newman who could stand in a room with the likes of Victor, Nikki, and Victoria without trembling had changed her in ways that even she didn't fully understand. But those scars, the invisible ones, still governed her choices. She still questioned whether affection was genuine or a trick, whether tenderness was real or part of some grand design to control her again. That was why Holden had slipped through her defenses so easily. He made her believe that her pain was something to be admired, that her innocence was not a flaw but a virtue. He didn't challenge her, he reassured her. And that was exactly what made him dangerous. Meanwhile, Kyle's world was splintering under the weight of frustration and guilt. He knew he was being possessive, that his concern for Claire was blurring into obsession, but he couldn't stop. He had watched too many people manipulate those they claimed to love, his parents, his ex-wife, even himself, and he refused to let Claire become another victim. The irony, of course, was that in his desperate effort to protect her, he was becoming the very thing she feared. His messages grew more frequent, his questions more pointed, his tone increasingly urgent. Claire noticed the shift immediately. Every attempt he made to show care began to sound like control. Every warning about Holden felt like an accusation that she wasn't capable of making her own decisions. In Los Angeles, the lines blurred even more. The glamour of the city, the promise of new beginnings, and the dangerous undercurrent of ambition created a breeding ground for secrets. Sharon Newman's sudden arrival added another layer of complexity. Sharon, with her deep empathy and hard-earned wisdom, sensed something was wrong long before anyone else did. She saw the unease in Claire's posture when Holden entered the room, the fleeting tension when Kyle's name came up, and the quiet way Claire avoided her father Nick's gaze whenever he asked how things were going. Sharon understood heartbreak, manipulation, and the cycle of trust and betrayal better than most. She had seen it destroy lives and save them. She tried to reach out to Claire, to offer her guidance, but Claire's heart was a battlefield now, and reason had no place in it. Nick Newman, ever the protective father, grew restless. He didn't know Holden well enough to trust him, and Kyle's erratic behavior didn't make things easier. Noah, watching his sister's turmoil from a distance, felt the dread of a man who had already lost too much and knew that once trust cracked, it never truly mended. And yet, all of them were spectators in a drama that was no longer theirs to control. Claire's choices were her own, and she was beginning to realize that independence came at the cost of loneliness. Holden's past, however, was not as clean as it appeared. Before Los Angeles, before he entered Claire's life with that calm, unassuming charm, he had been involved in a series of questionable deals with Audra Charles, a woman known for turning every business relationship into a battlefield of seduction and betrayal. Audra's influence lingered over him like a phantom. She had once described Holden as a man who could wear sincerity like a suit, a perfect facade hiding ambition sharp enough to cut glass. Their entanglement had ended, at least publicly, but Los Angeles had a way of reviving old ghosts, and whispers of Audra's presence began circulating just as Claire started to fall deeper into Holden's orbit. Kyle's worst fears were slowly being validated. Each fragment of information he uncovered about Holden's past with Audra added fuel to the fire of his suspicion. But the tragedy of it all was that no one believed him, not Sharon, not Nick, and certainly not Claire. To them, Kyle's warning sounded like the ramblings of a jealous ex-lover desperate to regain control. The harder he tried to expose Holden, the more he pushed Claire away. And Holden, skilled in emotional manipulation, played his part perfectly, always calm, always forgiving, always just misunderstood enough to keep Claire's sympathy firmly on his side. It all came to a head one evening in Los Angeles, during a quiet charity event hosted by Newman Media. The night glittered with artificial warmth, champagne, laughter, and the illusion of peace. But beneath the polished surface, every conversation carried a different weight. Kyle arrived uninvited, his eyes restless, his demeanor taut with desperation. Claire, startled but not surprised, tried to maintain composure as he confronted her privately, pleading with her to see the truth. She wanted to believe him, but Holden's gentle presence at her side blurred the edges of her doubt. Then, as if the universe wanted to seal Kyle's downfall, Audra herself appeared. Her sudden arrival, her confident smile, and the knowing glance she exchanged with Holden were enough to shatter the illusion of innocence Claire had built around him. The truth unraveled in silence rather than chaos. Claire saw it not in words but in gestures, the way Holden's expression hardened for just a second, the way Audra's smirk lingered, the way Kyle stepped back as if realizing that even vindication could taste bitter. For the first time, Claire understood the complexity of love and deception intertwined, how easily the same hands that comfort could also conceal, how truth, once delayed, became indistinguishable from lies. But revelation did not bring peace. In the days that followed, Los Angeles turned from a city of dreams into a mirror of regret. Holden's deceit wasn't driven by malice but survival. He had debts, emotional and financial, that Audra had used to pull him back into her orbit. Claire felt betrayed, yes, but also strangely compassionate. For all his faults, Holden had genuinely cared for her, and that made the wound cut deeper. Kyle, on the other hand, found no satisfaction in being right. His vindication came at the cost of the one thing he had been fighting for, Claire's trust. She withdrew from both men, retreating into herself, unsure of who she could believe anymore. Meanwhile, in Genoa City, ripples from Los Angeles began to reach the powerful corridors of the Newman and Abbott families. Victor, always the patriarchal strategist, began making quiet inquiries. Nikki worried for her granddaughter's emotional state, while Jack Abbott watched his son unravel and wondered if perhaps Kyle had inherited more of his impulsive streak than he cared to admit. For both families, the events in Los Angeles served as a reminder that no matter how far one traveled, Genoa City's web of loyalty, legacy, and rivalry always found a way to pull them back in. As autumn descended over California, the three lives of Kyle, Claire, and Holden stood at a crossroads shaped by deception and desire. Claire began to rebuild, focusing on self-discovery rather than romance. Holden disappeared from public view, his last known contact being a transfer from a small bank in Santa Monica, rumored to be a payoff from someone connected to Audra. Kyle returned to Wisconsin, changed and hollow, but also aware that his obsession had nearly consumed him. In his solitude, he began to see that protecting someone didn't always mean saving them, that sometimes, love meant letting them fall, even if it meant watching from afar as they learned to rise. And yet, as the young and the restless has always proven, no story ever truly ends. In a show built on legacies, betrayals, and rebirths, the ghosts of Los Angeles would inevitably find their way back to Genoa City. Whether through a scandal in the Newman media empire, a business takeover orchestrated by Audra, or a quiet letter Claire might one day receive from Holden, the echoes of this tangled triangle would continue to reverberate. What began as a simple love story had become something far darker, a reflection of how even the purest intentions could be corrupted by fear, how love could become a weapon, and how trust, once broken, became the most dangerous currency of all. Kyle Abbott knew that his mistakes had shattered something that could never fully be repaired. For all his experience in navigating corporate games, manipulative alliances, and emotional strategies learned from growing up in the Abbott household, he had failed at the one thing that truly mattered: love. His downfall didn't come from greed or pride, but from confusion, weakness, and an inability to understand the difference between comfort and connection. When he first crossed paths with Audra Charles, he had been adrift, still reeling from failed promises, lost marriages, and the suffocating weight of living up to both the Abbott name and the lingering expectations of Genoa City. Audra arrived like a storm, seductive, ambitious, unpredictable, and confident. She understood the world Kyle came from because she lived in one far crueler. She didn't need his affection, she needed his access. And at first, he thought that was all he needed from her too, a mutual arrangement between two people who had already stopped believing in innocence. But what began as an act of convenience soon evolved into something dangerous. Audra's fascination with Kyle wasn't about strategy anymore, it was personal. She saw in him what she didn't have: moral restraint, vulnerability, and a conscience that still resisted the darkness she had long surrendered to. She could manipulate powerful men with ease, but Kyle was different. His guilt made him human, and his honesty, though inconsistent, drew her in. Yet Kyle's heart was elsewhere, even if he didn't admit it. Deep down, it belonged to Claire Newman, the woman who had shown him that redemption was still possible, that tenderness didn't always have to be traded for advantage. Claire was light where Audra was shadow, and for a man like Kyle, who had spent his life walking between both worlds, that duality was irresistible and dangerous in equal measure. When Victor Newman had used both Kyle and Audra for his corporate maneuvering at Glissade, it had created a web that none of them could escape from cleanly. Kyle had told himself that what he shared with Audra was transactional, a partnership built on mutual benefit, not emotion. But Audra, ever the strategist, had blurred those lines. She had given him more than he asked for, and by the time Kyle realized she wanted something deeper, something real, it was too late. He had already fallen for Claire, and Audra's desire turned from fascination to vengeance. It all came crashing down during the infamous summer in France. Kane Ashby, always chasing power in the shadows of others, had orchestrated a manipulative event aboard the luxury train that carried half of Genoa City's elite across the French countryside. The atmosphere was intoxicating: champagne, whispers, ambition disguised as elegance, and Kyle, caught between guilt and temptation, made the worst decision of his life. What happened between him and Audra on that train was not love, not even lust, it was self-destruction masquerading as escape. It was a moment of weakness born from a man trying to drown out his own regrets. But for Claire Newman, who learned of the encounter later, it was an act of betrayal that ripped through every ounce of trust she had painstakingly rebuilt. Her pain was not naive, it was deeply earned. She had believed in Kyle when no one else had, and he had repaid that faith with the same carelessness that had destroyed so many before him. Claire didn't lash out, didn't scream, didn't try to ruin Kyle's life the way Audra might have. She simply walked away, quietly, decisively, with that air of wounded grace that made it clear she would rather live with pain than humiliation. She didn't need vengeance, she needed clarity. And for that, she turned to Holden Novak. Holden, with his easy charm and disarming patience, was everything Kyle wasn't at that moment. He didn't demand forgiveness, didn't beg for understanding. He just listened. When Claire talked about her confusion, about the unbearable ache of losing trust, Holden didn't try to fix her. He let her breathe. And that, more than any grand gesture, made her feel seen again. Holden's humor was effortless, his compliments never overbearing, and his interest in her struggles felt genuine, or at least genuine enough for a woman trying to find her balance again. He reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, that she was allowed to be happy without permission. The connection between them grew quickly, and before long, a trip away from Genoa City seemed not only appealing but necessary. Los Angeles, with its distance and anonymity, offered the illusion of healing. Claire told herself that the trip was just a way to clear her mind, to separate her heart from the chaos of Genoa City, to start breathing in a city where her name meant nothing. Holden encouraged it, assuring her that a change of scenery would do her good, that she deserved peace. What she didn't realize was that peace was the one thing Genoa City never allowed for long, and Kyle Abbott wasn't the type of man to let go quietly. Kyle's arrival in Los Angeles wasn't planned, it was instinctual. He told himself he was there to make amends, to apologize one last time, to find closure. But deep down, he knew he couldn't stand the thought of Holden replacing him in Claire's life. He told himself that Holden wasn't trustworthy, that his connection to Audra was proof enough. But the truth was more painful. Kyle was haunted by the idea that someone else could offer Claire the kind of comfort he had destroyed. His pursuit of redemption quickly began to look more like obsession, and Los Angeles wasn't ready for the storm that followed him. As Kyle lingered in the city, his presence drew the attention of those who knew him well. Sharon, already in town for business, tried to warn him that chasing Claire across states wouldn't heal the damage he caused. Nick Newman, protective of his daughter, grew suspicious of Kyle's motives, while Noah quietly observed from afar, worried that Claire was setting herself up for another heartbreak. Meanwhile, Holden played his part to perfection, patient, kind, understanding. He never spoke ill of Kyle, which only deepened Claire's belief that Holden's affection came without agenda. But beneath Holden's calm exterior was a man with secrets. His past with Audra was far from buried. The two had once collaborated in a series of questionable deals tied to investment funds that bordered on illegal manipulation, activities that had nearly drawn the attention of Victor Newman himself. Holden had escaped exposure by cutting ties and fleeing to Los Angeles, but Audra's shadow followed him like a warning. When whispers of her arrival in California began to circulate, Holden's confidence began to crack. For the first time, Claire sensed something she couldn't name, a flicker of unease in his eyes, a subtle shift in tone when her questions pressed too close. Meanwhile, Kyle uncovered enough about Holden's dealings to convince himself that this was his chance to make things right. He would expose Holden's true motives and prove to Claire that he wasn't the only one with secrets. But the irony was cruel. In trying to save her, he once again became the very thing she needed to escape from. His persistence made Claire feel hunted, not protected. Each attempt to warn her only drove her deeper into Holden's arms, seeking refuge from the emotional chaos that Kyle brought with him wherever he went. The inevitable confrontation between Kyle and Holden unfolded quietly one evening on the terrace of a Los Angeles hotel overlooking the city lights. There were no punches, no raised voices, just two men staring each other down, both driven by guilt and pride. Holden, with his polished restraint, told Kyle that love built on control wasn't love at all. Kyle, bitter and defensive, accused Holden of manipulating Claire the way Audra had manipulated him. But beneath all the words, the truth was simple: both men had failed her in different ways. One had betrayed her trust, the other had exploited her need for comfort. In the end, it was Claire who broke the cycle. She saw through both facades, realizing that her healing couldn't come from either of them. She left Los Angeles abruptly, returning to Genoa City alone, ready to face the mess she had left behind on her own terms. Her departure left both men hollow. Holden's secrets began to catch up to him when Audra resurfaced, demanding repayment for old debts. Kyle returned home to Jack Abbott's quiet disappointment, carrying the weight of a man who had lost not only love but self-respect. Back in Genoa City, the whispers began. Victor Newman, always aware of every ripple, questioned why so many of his family members kept finding themselves entangled with men and women who thrived on deceit. Sharon tried to support Claire, while Nikki, with her characteristic intuition, warned her granddaughter that sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't betrayal but forgiveness. Los Angeles faded into memory, but the consequences remained. Kyle, desperate for redemption, began working tirelessly to rebuild his reputation at Jabot, while Claire turned her focus toward her future, one free from manipulation, expectation, or the weight of other people's mistakes. Yet, in true Young and the Restless fashion, the story was far from over. Holden, cornered by Audra's threats, began to unravel. Rumors emerged of a new scheme forming in the West Coast, one that could reach Genoa City sooner than anyone expected. And as Kyle watched the sunset from the Abbott estate, he couldn't shake the feeling that his past, and Claire's, were about to collide once again in ways neither of them could control.